we've been looking at the question of the week for numerous weeks, except for last week, obviously, because we were talking about the purpose of the law. But so what is hell like? We're going to finish this question up next week. But I was thinking about how to answer this because, it's true that we really aren't given a whole lot of good biblical descriptions about, like, you walk into hell, what's it like? Like, what does it look like? You have a lot of different people writing different books about how they supposedly went to hell. I personally don't believe that those actually were genuine encounters. I know other people might disagree with me. That's all right. But I think that I've compiled a basic idea of what hell looks like. If I were to say, I went to my family's house for Thanksgiving, and then if I were to say this, I went to my family's house for Thanksgiving, and it was very cold there, you would know that I wasn't talking about the temperature. You would know that I was talking about more of the relationships there, the atmosphere. You're walking, it's kind of cold, right? I'm not saying that I did. I'm saying hypothetically, okay? Watch my dad's all watching. He's like, I'll show you cold. I'm just kidding. But so we all kind of have this idea of there are some things that you really can't explain too much, but you can just kind of give a picture of it by saying certain words like that, like something being cold, or how's your relationship with your ex-wife? Cold. There's just kind of this idea that goes along with it that kind of explains it. And sometimes with the Bible, that's kind of what you have to do with descriptions of hell. You kind of have to draw a conclusion based on one of those words that kind of just gets that conveyed meaning across. So there are obviously limited descriptions of the scenery, though, of hell and heaven. I mean, really, we do have a limited idea there. The new earth, for instance, is it going to look like this one does, or is it going to look different? Well, we don't know. Is there going to, in the new heaven, like, what's that like? Does it look the same as the present heaven, or, we really don't know these things. We know about the heavenly city and those kinds of things, but as far as descriptions, because the heavenly city is one small part of the whole thing, so, what's the rest of it look like? Well, we don't really know. But I think that if we, I brought my Bible and I left it somewhere. What did I do with it? But I think if we read a couple passages, we can get going in the right direction. Did anybody bring a physical copy of a Bible? I have no idea where I set mine down at. Of course they did. And I'll grab hers. It's right here. Is that all right? Okay. And in Luke chapter 16, it says this. Don't you hate it when people borrow your books and then they like rip pages or something? Well, I actually don't usually loan people my books because I know that they're going to put their sweating cups on it and stuff, and it's going to get that, or they're going to dog-ear the pages or some other ungodly thing. Luke 16, verses 22 through 24 says this. It says, "The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, 'Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame.'" So there's a couple things that we can kind of see from this very short story. The first is hell is a place without relief or comfort. It's not something like here where you can go unwind at the spa, right? You can't just swing by Bahama Bucks and grab some frozen goodie. It's a place that is void of those comforts, those reliefs. The second thing that we see is it's a fiery place. So it's a place that's not temperature controlled. Never mind. I was going to make a joke, but never mind. It's also, we see from the story, it's a painful place. People aren't having fun here. And the next thing we obviously see from the story that people are conscious and aware. They haven't faded into something. They're there. They're present as a person. They're conscious and aware. And obviously has some form of body to him, because he said, dip water and put it on my tongue. So there's obviously he exists in some form of a physical body. We don't know exactly what it looks like. But it stands to reason that if in heaven we have the resurrected body, then in hell we would have an unresurrected body, so a body of physical decay. That stands to reason. Obviously, maybe I'm overstepping, but it seems like we could draw that conclusion. Another thing we see from the story is it's something that is ongoing. It's something you can't just escape from. You can't just like hop the fence and get out of town, you know. These are all things we see in this story. We also, if you notice, it doesn't really portray him walking to different sections of hell. You know what I mean? It's not like sometimes we get this image in our head, like maybe it's like here, you know, oh, well, let's go behind this rock over here where the sun's not quite so hot. But the sun isn't, I mean, the heat isn't just coming from like the sun, for instance. It's kind of the whole thing. So if you go and read in your Bibles, you're going to come to a lot of different times where the word Sheol is used in the Old Testament. And unfortunately, people have used this to kind of get to conclusions that aren't necessarily biblical. So like one of these conclusions is that there is an intermediary like limbo sort of place now that people go to now, and then that's going to end someday. Or it already ended when Jesus was resurrected. The people kind of argue back and forth. Or sometimes it can mean, well, let's not get too off topic here. The big idea in the Old Testament of Sheol, as you're reading, Sheol is basically the grave or death. For instance, Job mentions the way that in Sheol, this is a place where everybody goes. It's a place where your body no longer has a understanding of what's happening. It's dead. Obviously, your spirit doesn't rest in Sheol, but your body does. So there's that. I know a lot of times people made a whole big thing out of it, where if you got cremated, you weren't going to be in the resurrection, and that's just not really the idea of the Bible. Matthew 8:12 mentions hell as a place of outer darkness. So think a bland place, no scenery. It's not something that is like bright and cheery. It's something that's dark and heavy. And that's kind of what I was talking about with the word cold. You know, he just kind of brings up an idea. And I think outer darkness does the exact same thing. It's outer. It's something away, and it's darkness. It's not light or joy. It's darkness. And then the Matthew 25:41, as well as really tons of other scriptures, talk about hell as a lake of fire. I don't know for sure if it's talking about like an ocean, but it made of fire instead of water. I think it's more talking a lake as far as like a big plain of fire. Once again, I might be reading too much into that. And actually in Revelation, it talks about the way that death and the grave is going to be thrown into the lake of fire. Obviously not literally, since death isn't like a personified thing, although sometimes it's talked about in a personified way. We talked about the way before about it's a place, in that place there's God's presence isn't there. And the question becomes, how can there be fires but darkness? Doesn't really make sense, does it? Well, I maybe this helps me, but maybe it'll help you too. I imagine kind of like a dark cave where the sun doesn't ever reach it there. But there's kind of like a red glow there. So it's dark, but you can kind of dimly see, like if you strain your eyes. That's just the image I get in my head. Once again, that might not be accurate, but that's just kind of what helps me understand it. Alternatively, though, there are some people who have suggested that the darkness is not necessarily literal. It's more of descriptive of the feel or the atmosphere of the place. So outer darkness wouldn't necessarily for sure be a dark place, just a emotionally dark place, spiritually, physically dark. So, or I shouldn't say physically, I mean pain dark. So we also see that it is a place where you're separated from others, not necessarily by space, but by comforts. So like here on earth, for instance, there's some level of comfort. So like as a married couple, you guys can come together, that kind of comfort. You can do things like, hug people here on earth, things like that, where there's physical contact that a lot of scientific studies have shown the medical help that physical touch does for people. And in hell, that's not really a thing. You see him in the story, he's sitting there by himself and in pain. and he looks up and sees somebody else that's not having a hard time. He's like, if I just have a piece of me cooled off from this intense heat, just a piece. And so you see this kind of a place of extremes there. Romans 2:8 describes hell as a place of wrath and anger. Obviously, it's God's wrath and anger, but that kind of makes me think that it's you in your spirit, you don't feel at peace. You know how, like, when you're waiting for the doctor and you're real nervous, and you're in the waiting room and you kind of maybe get really nervous. Maybe somebody here has like an anxiety disorder, where maybe you start to shake or something like that. I kind of think that hell is sort of like that, where it's something where emotionally you're not just having a good time and being in pain. Like, oh, it's like nowadays where I wake up with pain, but it's all right. No. Your spirit is not at peace, plus your body is not at peace, plus your mind is not at peace, plus the place is not a place of peace. So I mean, it's like a complete wholeness. If peace means a complete wholeness and well-being, then definitely hell is a complete absence of peace and well-being. So, synopsis here. If we add all these things together, I think we can kind of come to a physical description of what hell must be like. I tried not to overstep here from the different passages, but a bleak field with burning torment, a place where it's hard to see anything. It's a place where you're constantly seeking the slightest of relief. There are no houses there because people are not creating their abodes there. It's not like there's something there like, okay, well, let's go to the senior center today and try and get some activity there. It's not a place of scenery. You know how you can look outside and say, wow, what a pretty mountain. Well, hell's not a place of scenery. It's a place, there's nothing to do there. He's literally just sitting there in pain. Obviously, God's presence is not there. It's just an empty and barren filled with fire. But it does have limits. Okay, so hell is not an infinite wasteland. There is eventually a point where it ends. But people aren't doing leisurely things like going on strolls or bike rides or advancing society. That's not a thing. Don't think of it as like, oh, it's like L.A., so society, but just not a really good society. No, it's more like nothing. It's a place of nothing. Go ahead, buddy. Maybe. Once again, though, I don't want to commit to anything too seriously. Maybe. He drew a picture of what, as I'm describing.